In 1979, a film came out that critics didn't know how to review, audiences didn't know how to feel about, and Hollywood had no idea how to sell. And the story behind it is darker than anything that made that final cut. Here are the facts. 1. Before hardcore was even a script, it was already a real fear living in Paul Schrader's head. Growing up in Michigan, Schrader reportedly heard about a teenage girl who went missing and eventually turned up inside the adult film world. Not as a kidnap victim in any dramatic sense, but as someone who had quietly slipped into that underground and disappeared inside it. That story stayed with him for years before he ever put it on paper. And when he finally did write it, he didn't sensationalize it or turn it into something over the top. He kept that same quiet dread. The idea that something like this could happen to a normal family in normal America without anyone noticing until it was far too late. That is the real horror underneath hardcore. It doesn't need monsters or villains with big speeches. The scariest part of the whole film is just how ordinary everything around it feels. 2. Here's where the film gets personal in a way most people miss entirely. Schrader didn't just write about some random religious man from Middle America. He wrote about the world he actually grew up in, a strict Dutch Calvinist household where faith defined everything, morality was absolute, and anything outside those boundaries was treated like it simply didn't exist. He was even on track to become a minister before he ended up in film. So when you watch Jake Van Dorn moving through Los Angeles completely rigid, completely overwhelmed, completely out of place in a world he has zero framework for understanding, that is not just a character choice. That is something deeply personal being put on screen. The film almost works like a quiet question Schrader is asking himself the whole way through. What happens when the belief system you were raised inside cannot protect you from the reality waiting just outside the door? And what makes that question uncomfortable is that the movie never really answers it cleanly. 3. Before George C. Scott ever touched this role, hardcore was heading in a completely different direction. Warren Beatty was reportedly attached to the project early in development, both as a producer and as the lead. And just sitting with that detail for a second, Beatty at that point was one of the biggest names in Hollywood, someone who naturally pulled projects toward commercial appeal, polish, and mainstream accessibility. But he and Schrader reportedly clashed over how dark and uncompromising the film should be. And eventually, Beatty walked away from it entirely. Think about what that means for the film we ended up with. A softer lead, a more palatable tone, a story that probably would have been shaped around wider audience comfort rather than psychological weight. Instead, George C. Scott stepped in and the entire emotional identity of the film shifted with him into something colder, more rigid, and far harder to shake. 4. What was happening behind the camera on hardcore was almost as intense as what was happening in front of it. George C. Scott and Paul Schrader reportedly clashed from very early in production, and what started as creative friction turned into something far more hostile as filming went on. Scott had a reputation for being difficult on set, and Schrader was still a relatively young director trying to hold his own film together while working with one of Hollywood's most intimidating personalities. At certain points during production, Scott reportedly refused to leave his trailer entirely, shutting down the shoot for hours at a time. And according to accounts from the set, things escalated to the point where Schrader allegedly told Scott he would never direct again just to get him back in front of the camera. Whether every detail is perfectly documented or not, the tension was clearly real. And when you watch Scott as Jake Van Dorn, there is emotional rigidity underneath every scene, like someone holding something back that keeps wanting to push through. 5.
Turn it off. Turn it off! Turn it off! Turn it off, please.
This is the fact that changes how you watch the entire movie. Schrader didn't recreate the adult industry for the camera. He physically took the production inside it. Several performers in the film came directly from that world rather than from traditional casting. And the locations used were actual adult theaters, sex shops, and backstreet establishments operating in California at the time. Susan Hubley, who plays Nikki in the film, later described the experience as genuinely disorienting because she was acting inside spaces that were completely real and alongside people who were not playing a role at all. Schrader wanted proximity. He wanted the audience standing inside something real, not watching a cleaned-up Hollywood version of it. And it worked, because there are moments in hardcore where the line between the film and reality becomes genuinely hard to find. Hit subscribe because from here on, things only get darker. 6.
Because believe me, the world of porn is as weird as anything you ever could imagine.
By the late 1970s, a very specific kind of dread was moving through American culture, and it had nothing to do with what was on movie screens. People were hearing things. Rumors about hidden films, hidden rooms, hidden worlds where violence and pornography were crossing over into each other in ways nobody could fully confirm, but nobody could completely dismiss either. It lived in newspaper columns, late-night conversations, and urban legends that kept growing the more people passed them around. Hardcore lands right in the middle of all that anxiety, and what it does is genuinely unsettling. It never confirms the worst version of what you might be imagining. It just parks itself at the edge of that fear and stays there, completely still, while your own imagination does the rest. You stop watching a missing person story at that point. You start sitting inside a cultural panic that the film understands far better than you do. 7.
Movie, there was a lot of naked women and everything, and so guys were always coming around saying, I gotta inspect the electrical.
When hardcore was released, it genuinely confused the industry. It wasn't entertainment in the way Hollywood knew how to market. It wasn't exploitation either, because it had too much emotional weight and intelligence behind it. And it definitely wasn't a comfortable night out for mainstream audiences. Critics split almost immediately, with some recognizing it as something serious and emotionally brave, and others simply not knowing what to make of the tone or the subject matter. But the most interesting part is not that people disagreed. It's that a large portion of the audience walked out simply not knowing how they felt at all. That kind of reaction doesn't happen when a film fails. It happens when a film hits something real that the audience has no framework for processing. Hardcore wasn't ahead of its time in any flashy way. It was ahead of it quietly, and that's actually the harder thing to pull off. 8. The version of hardcore that audiences saw in 1979 is already heavy. But the ending Schrader originally had in mind reportedly went much further. Early versions of the story apparently pushed toward a far more nihilistic conclusion, one where there was no emotional landing point at all, where the consequences of everything Jake had gone through were left completely raw and unresolved. Concerns about audience reception during production led to adjustments that pulled the final version back slightly, giving it a small degree of shape that the earliest drafts reportedly didn't have. But here's the thing. Even the released version doesn't offer comfort. There's no clean resolution, no moment where the audience gets to exhale and reset. Just a weight that follows you out of the theater and stays with you. Which tells you everything about how dark the original must have been, given that what made it to the screen still doesn't let you go. Most people walked past hardcore without a second thought, and now you know exactly what they missed. Drop the next film in the comments, subscribe, and we'll go just as deep on that one too.